Well, thanks for having me. I'll have to say that I feel quite proud to be on a distinguished panel like this. So I'll move forward kind of quickly here. I wanted to cover a few things. First, I want to kind of cover the hypothesis of energy use, emissions, and the government's role versus the free market's role. And then I wanted to get into my latest research, which is a regression analysis on free markets, greenhouse gases, and energy use, and the connections between those three there. Now, when I started this research, I wanted to answer a few questions. First of all, I wanted to ask and answer, does the presence of free markets lead to more efficient resource use? Now, economic theory tells us that the competitive pressures that force economic entities to produce more with less inputs should say that, but I wanted to prove that. And I also wanted to find out that does the presence of free markets lead to less carbon dioxide emitted per unit of production? Now, there is no economic theory because there is no innate profit incentive to reducing carbon dioxide currently. So I wanted to see if possibly the competitive pressures that affected energy use also affected carbon emissions. And then the last question, which really has to do with public policy, and that's why I'm on this panel, is that does increased government intervention in economic activities lead to more or less energy use and carbon emissions per unit of production? Which really the question is government efficient at efficiency? Now, the pro-government hypothesis, this is what we're hearing on the state and federal level and even on the international scale. And what we're hearing is that unless government intervenes, economic entities will pay no regard to energy use or emissions. We're also hearing that government is needed to push the economy towards greater energy efficiency through a numerous amount of policies. And also we hear government is needed to put a price on carbon to internalize these negative externalities such as climate change risk. This is what we're hearing, and this is why we're seeing a lot of public policy going through, such as cap and trade bills. Back in June of 2009, the House passed their bill, American Clean Energy Security Act of 2009, or also known as the Waxman-Markey bill for those two fine-looking politicians over there. And they just introduced the Senate version about a week ago as well. But we're also seeing other policies, such as renewable portfolio standards, which force utilities and ultimately ratepayers, consumers of electricity, to purchase a certain percentage of renewable power by a certain year. We're also looking at efficiency mandates, such as the CAFE standards, which force automakers to make more fuel-efficient vehicles. And we're also looking at efficiency regulations for buildings. Now, I know in Oregon they're trying to make all buildings net zero emissions by 2030, which was laughed at a little bit in the Oregon legislature. But we are seeing that across the United States that a lot of state legislatures are imposing energy efficiency mandates. But really what we're looking at is laws, mandates, regulations, requirements, rules, policies, paperwork, red tape, all coming from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and of course the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that is trying to guide our economy, supposedly, into greater energy efficiency. Now that's where the alternative hypothesis comes in, and that's the one that I was looking into. And it's what if free markets and limited government achieve greater energy efficiency and less carbon dioxide intensity, all while improving our standard of living? Kind of the cliche, a win-win. Now the data that I used, just so we could kind of get a heads up on where I'm going with this, is that I looked at 165 countries across the world over a 10-year time frame, 1995 to 2004, and I used the Heritage Economic Freedom Score. Now what that does is it assesses the economic freedom level of a nation, and the scale is from 1 to 100, 100 being the most free. Now that economic freedom score encompasses a significant amount of different effects. Business freedom, how easy it is to open a business. Trade freedom, which measures the amount of tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers such as quotas. Fiscal freedom, which judges the overall tax burden. Government size, which is pretty self-explanatory. Monetary freedom, which measures price stability, inflation factors. Investment freedom, which shows the restrictions on foreign investment in a country. And financial freedom, which measures the extent that the government owns banks within a country. Property rights, and freedom from corruption. And then there's an average economic freedom score, which I use, that encompasses all of these separate indexes or indices. And then I combine this with energy and economic variables. Now, how I define energy intensity is primary energy use per dollar of gross domestic product, and carbon dioxide intensity is carbon dioxide emissions per dollar of gross domestic product. Now, what we found was the free markets, first of all, they do lead to these competitive pressures, which force entities in the economy to produce more with less, and that means energy efficiency. So an additional freedom score point is associated with approximately a 2% decrease in energy intensity, and it's a relatively firm relationship. Now, like I'd said before, there is no innate profit incentive to reducing carbon dioxide emissions from either individuals or businesses within the economy. However, there's an extremely close link between energy use and carbon dioxide emissions that leads to energy efficiency, leads to carbon dioxide efficiency, and found that a 1% decrease in energy intensity results in a 0.91% decrease in carbon dioxide intensity. A very firm relationship there. So what does that mean? That means economic freedom, the competitive pressures that come with economic freedom, lead to energy efficiency, which lead to carbon dioxide efficiency. So an additional freedom score point is associated with about a 2.4% decrease in carbon intensity. But this is really not all. We also got to talk about the environmental Kuznets effect. Now, I am an economist, and I know that when I talk about environmental Kuznets, most of people's eyes kind of glaze over, okay? But really, the gist of it is that environmental quality is a luxury good, and we can only afford it if we have money in our pocket, okay? Now, improved environmental quality goes hand in hand with economic prosperity. And it's not only this effect, but it's also that when you have more economic freedom, you have a more stable macroeconomic system, you have the ability to make longer-term investments in energy efficiency upgrades as well. So what I found was that economic freedom obviously equals prosperity. I think most of us know this in this room. And it's a very firm relationship, as we can see here, that a 1-unit increase in that economic freedom score is associated with about a 10% increase in gross national income per capita. Now, drawing that farther, that economic freedom that causes prosperity also causes energy efficiency. Seen that a 1% increase in the gross national income per capita is associated with a 0.09% decrease in energy intensity. And once again, because those energy use and carbon emissions are so interlinked, prosperity, hopefully pushed on by economic freedom, leads to energy efficiency, which leads to carbon dioxide efficiency. And a 1% increase in gross national income per capita results in a 0.11% decline in carbon intensity. So the three ways that free markets really help, kind of a summation of that, is first of all, the competitive pressures force entities to continuously produce more goods with less inputs. Also, prosperity gives that ability to purchase luxury goods like environmental quality and gives the ability to make longer-term capital investments, whether that be in energy efficiency or reducing carbon emissions. It's usually with energy efficiency. Also, technological attainment and accumulation of wealth lead to a more use of dense energy forms from wood to coal to natural gas to nuclear, all emitting less and less greenhouse gas emissions per unit of output over time. So the regression results, where does my research come in on this? Well, that question, does economic freedom have this significant and negative effect on the energy and carbon intensity of a nation? Well, the answer is yes, which is a good one. First of all, free markets and energy efficiency. An additional freedom score point will decrease the country's energy intensity by approximately 0.82%, so almost a full percent. Now, there's a number of other factors in there that are related to economic freedom, such as the income classification. I broke all countries up into quartiles, 4 different income classifications. And as you move up in those quartiles, which is an indirect result of economic freedom, it'll also decrease energy intensity as well. Gross domestic product growth, as the nation grows through economic freedom, it also decreases energy efficiency. And foreign direct investment per capita also decreases energy intensity. Now, also because that close link that I've determined between energy use and carbon emissions, it also has the same effect on carbon intensity. An additional freedom score point will decrease the country's carbon intensity by a little over 1%. Pretty significant effect. And once again, income classification, gross domestic product growth, foreign direct investment per capita, all of these things that are a proxy for economic freedom all have negative effects on carbon intensity. But really, and this is where I'm going to get into the last 2 graphs here, okay? And it was interesting because I was talking with someone from the Heritage Foundation, and he said he had read my paper and that I only needed these 2 graphs. Okay. He says, you can drop all that regression stuff, all the economics talks, and just put these two graphs in the entire thing. So if you're going to listen to me at all during the entire presentation, this will be the time. Really, the results, freedom means efficiency. Now, that's energy efficiency or carbon dioxide efficiency. And what I found was the more economically free nations, not only do they have lower levels of energy intensity overall, but they are declining over the 10-year period that I studied. And less economically free nations are higher in energy intensity overall and increasing over time. Now we see the exact same thing with carbon dioxide intensity. More economically free nations are lower in carbon intensity overall and declining over the 10-year period, and less economically free nations are increasing their carbon dioxide intensity. So what we see is that the level of a country's economic freedom is a statistically significant and negative determinant of both energy intensity and carbon dioxide intensity, which is kind of contrary to the top-down regulatory state policy is what we're seeing currently on the federal level, on the state level, on the local level, and even on the international scale. So really we need to realize that the merits of free markets, the merits of limited government, and economic prosperity should not be overlooked as this no-regrets method. Now I say no regrets because most of us in this room are probably not too worried about carbon dioxide emissions. Okay? Most of us are probably not telling our neighbors that they need to consume less energy. That's probably true. But something like this is a method that we can improve our standard of living and reduce the amount of energy use and carbon dioxide emissions per unit of production. So that's why I say it's a no-regret strategy, because we should be pursuing it anyhow. Now you can find that full analysis at cascadepolicy.org or talk to me afterwards as well. So thank you.